Hi everyone. I'm having a hard time recording videos right now for whatever reason. I keep making mistakes, so this is probably my fourth or fifth attempt. I hope everyone had a good weekend. This is my summary video of your discussions last week. And as I predicted, you guys had really good discussions around these topics. These are all ethical topics without any sort of yes or no answer, so I think naturally you were able to have better conversations um, surrounding them. Even though I know it's hard to have conversations digitally, I think you guys did a relatively good job of it. So without further ado, I'm going to try to summarize the points that all the groups had and also kind of give my own take on these questions so that you guys can come away with a better understanding, hopefully, of ethics in archaeology. So let me pull up the Word document here with the questions. So question one, who are the other stakeholders in the archaeological record besides archaeologists? And asks you uh, to name them. So just to give kind of a working definition of what a stakeholder is just somebody who has an interest in something. In this case, archaeological sites. And you guys did a relatively good job of like naming as many stakeholders as you could. Besides archaeologists, think about the any sort of group of people who has some sort of cultural connection to the artifacts being found. Usually, like indigenous groups. The state, oftentimes has kind of a vested interest in what archaeologists are doing, especially in the Middle East, because they like to have certain narratives that are oftentimes supported by the archaeological record. Think about people who own the land that is, the archaeology is going on. All of these people are stakeholders as long as they have some sort of involvement in the process of archaeology. So that one was relatively straightforward. Let's see here. Number two, can you describe any situations in which there might have been competing interests in owning archaeological sites and artifacts? How have these been resolved? And this sort of brings up a couple of laws. I think I saw two groups talk about these laws because you guys did a little bit of research, and they were NAGPRA and ARPA, and they're both important to understanding the legality of archaeology in the United States specifically. So ARPA has to do with who can and can't practice archaeology, basically. It's meant to stop looters from going around and just picking up artifacts and doing whatever they want with them. And NAGPRA is a little bit more relevant to humans in the modern era. It is the I believe it's the Native American Graves Repatriation Act. I think I'm missing a letter in there, but basically it refers to all of the artifacts and all of the human remains associated with Native American groups. And all of these things have to be repatriated as long as they are either in a museum or they're found in an archaeological site, and they can be traced, like correlated with a existing Native American group, which is kind of an effort on the government to give power and agency back to the indigenous people in our country who really had a lot of that robbed from them throughout our entire history. So those are kind of two laws that give power to the people, the other stakeholders beyond archaeologists. Because for the longest time, archaeology was just kind of like it was a really colonialist endeavor. And everyone who had the privilege to be able to practice archaeology basically just did whatever they wanted to. There was a lot of looting involved, whether or not people were practicing archaeology correctly. So these are a couple of laws that were passed in the latter part of the 20th century to kind of try to crack down on these things. And they didn't generally do a good job, with some exceptions. Like think about Kennewick Man, like you read about this week. There was a whole NAGPRA argument surrounding him. All right, let's pull up the next one here. Oh, this is the UNESCO one. You guys had a lot of really good discussion about this one. So basically, did the Australian government have the right in 1987 to propose a UNESCO designation of Ayers Rock slash Uluru as a natural and geological site? And it seems like, okay, so this is one where there was a little bit of debate. Some people said no, but it looks like most people generally said that they had the right to legally, but whether or not it was something morally that they should have done was sort of, you know, kind of rocky, which I think I agree with. I mean, legally, because the Australian government owned this area, they could designate it as a UNESCO site, but they didn't. They didn't ask for, you know, the permission from the Aboriginal people who lived there, and they really should have. And this is something that happens over and over again, even though, you know, UNESCO sites are sites of heritage preservation. Um, the designation, I'm pretty sure, isn't Uluru, it's Ayers Rock. So it's the Australian sort of skin of this site, which, you know, has all of these different implications for how the public views it. So there should have been a lot more integration of Aboriginal opinions into the naming of Ayers Rock as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, in my opinion. But once again, these aren't really things that have yes or no answers. So just my take on it. Oh, this is a really good one too. On September 11th, 2001, a terrorist attack in New York City destroyed and severely damaged the World Trade Center and surrounding buildings. So it asks you to describe the stakeholders. Have there been competing views of the past and its material remains? Were archaeologists involved? And you guys had to do a little bit of research to sort of uncover this, but the answer is yes. There were definitely archaeologists involved with the excavation of, you know, the site pretty much after it went down. I think 2 or 3 groups actually mentioned that beyond the United States, archaeologists had a harder time finding work abroad, and that's just kind of an impact of 9/11 on travel to certain countries in the Middle East. But something that I think is really important for this is there was an active excavation of the material remains of this site that was ultimately turned into a memorial and museum. So what are the ethics surrounding that? Is this an archaeological site? I think that so this is once again, this is opinion, but in my opinion, I would say that it is an archaeological site, which is actually something kind of running against the grain of most groups said that it wasn't because it's not old enough. And that's really the only difference between this site and something much older like, you know, like the Roman Colosseum, another site of terrible atrocities that happened a long time ago. This one just kind of hits closer to home, both temporally and spatially as well. But the only real difference is the time period. And archaeology is done in the historical era all the time. So I would say that it's a valid archaeological site. Now, where the ethics kind of come into shaky, it gets a little bit shaky when you're talking about the museum that they established, because they take all of these remains of people relatively recently dead and they put them up for display, and it's a tourist attraction, there's a gift shop, all of these things. It's kind of a strange take on a terrible tragedy. It's a commercialization of it. And I mean, I don't really think that's very ethical. Like, it's one thing to take this site and study it archaeologically, but it's another thing to monetize the excavation process. I think that's a problem. Oh, let's see here. So only a few questions left. What are the laws governing ownership of the past in the USA? Can you buy artifacts illegally, sell them? Should you have that right? Basically, yes. In the United States, you can legally buy and sell artifacts as long as they are legally obtained. Now, this is a tough one because it's really, really hard to prove the provenance of artifacts after they're taken from the initial site. Very easily, you could have somebody who's an antique trafficker go and, just like loot a site, bring artifacts back illegally, and then just say that they were like, handed down from their grandpa's whatever collection. Like, you can kind of just make narratives surrounding these sorts of things. So no matter what, even if somebody who's selling an artifact to you, says that this was found XYZ, you can't really believe them. So you should really try to avoid buying and especially selling artifacts. Because, as somebody who knows a lot of archaeologists, who is not an archaeologist himself, like, I know the importance of context when it comes to artifacts. And once the artifact is taken out of its context and sort of monetized, it loses a lot of historical significance. And this is kind of the key factor for these last two questions. So, let's see here. Oh, I'm not going to do the role play one, but I will talk about. I mean, is it legal? Would you ethically be like sell a collection of arrowheads to pay for college? That's such a catch-22, man. Like, uh, legally, you should never sell or remove arrowheads from their contexts. But like, if you're doing it for college, probably still shouldn't do it. But like, it's not like you're doing it for something terribly illegal. I don't know. I won't really get into that too much. In my opinion, you shouldn't do it. But if somebody is in a dire scenario, maybe. And then who gets hurt in the antiquities trade? Is this like trafficking illegal drugs? Overwhelmingly, the group said that they weren't related. They were, loosely related because both of these are illegal trade, but they're different. And I think that one of the reasons, and you guys kind of touched on this, is that when you traffic antiquities, you're losing history. And this is really important because archaeologists can't do their work if they go to a site and it's been completely looted and stripped of the most important things to them to be able to understand the past. And I mean, the antiquities trade is an example of something that people try to crack down on, but it's really, really hard to crack down on just because there are international laws governing it, and then there are national laws as well, and they don't always line up. International laws don't necessarily have teeth, as many of us know, at a local level. So it's relatively easy to get away with antiquities trafficking, depending who you are. Oftentimes, it comes at the support of terrorist organizations. Not that drug trafficking doesn't, but I think it's more blatant oftentimes with antiquities trafficking. But I think that the main difference, is really just a loss of heritage. When you're trafficking drugs, you could probably make an argument that somehow that links to a loss of heritage, but it's not the same blatant loss as when you're trafficking antiquities and taking them out of their historical context. And, I mean, that's kind of an important thing to think about. So next time you're at an antique shop and you see something that's an antiquity, remember, don't buy it because you don't really know what the provenance is. And that's, a good takeaway from this week. There's a lot of ethical things wrapped up in archaeology that need to be considered, as you move forward, especially if you want to get into this field. So that's my take for this week. I hope that everyone, once again, has a good rest of the week and has a great discussion for this week. Thank you.